Hello, everybody. Robert Barton here at North Carolina State Extension Forestry, and I'm going to kick off today's webinar on North Carolina forest products and markets. Today's webinar is brought to you by the North Carolina Tree Farm Program. And we're going to do quick little logistics, slides for today's webinar, as well as other resources that our presenter will be speaking about, will be available on the portal page where you joined. And I'll put that link here in the chat in just a couple minutes. Before we move on, though, let me introduce our speaker today. And Jameson, when I do that, why don't you go ahead and share your screen. I'll quit sharing mine. You get your slides up. Our speaker today is Jameson Boone. He's an extension specialist here at North Carolina State University in the Extension Forestry program. He is a forest management specialist, providing resources and information to help woodland owners make informed decisions while improving their forest resources. Prior to joining the extension program, Jameson worked as a service forester with the North Carolina Forest Service, providing technical assistance to landowners. Jameson has a bachelor's of science and a master's of science degree in forestry from North Carolina State University. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jameson.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, Bob. I like to preface this with I'm not an economist, so I can't explain all the technical implications that go behind some of the economic numbers, but what I can and what we try to do is provide those implications and understand what the market means for you. So hopefully if it makes sense to me, it makes sense to you. So feel free to ask any questions if I go too fast or there's anything I pass over. So our outline today is I wanted to go over just general forestry, the state of forestry in North Carolina, understand some of the recent economic trends, a little bit about how COVID-19 impacted our markets, general timber products, forest management considerations, and market prospects. So we have over time had a large evolving timber markets. Some of these products are still relevant, some aren't. So North Carolina, we like to say we're the foundation of forestry. Ship masts originally were a big market in North Carolina. So the British Crown designated all the longleaf pine that could be used for ship masts belonging to Great Britain. So obviously that riled up a lot of colonists that didn't like that. There were other products used called naval stores that were kind of secondary that actually ended up driving the market even more so than the actual wood. So as you get through construction, plank roads, furniture, long time use, after the invention of rail is really when timber markets skyrocketed. So we started seeing things like pulp and paper, poles and pilings, even getting into plywood and pallets. Later on, we started to get into OSB, and then some newer products. So as technology evolved, we were able to use wood a lot more efficiently. We started seeing products like chip and saw, which is where they can saw some saw timber, but also utilize the chips that you get from the trees. So energy production, energy is one of our oldest uses of wood, but specifically burning chips to then convert it, or burning wood to convert it then into other energy is relatively new. And then some of our newest products, wood pellets and cross-laminated timber, which we'll get into. So one new technology that's kind of making everyone excited is cross-laminated timber. So these have to do, it's under the category of mass timber, meaning using big pieces of wood that hold the structural components of buildings. So residential buildings have been built, forever with wood. What's new is building large commercial buildings with wood. So on this picture, you can see two products. So there's glulam, which is all of the wood, the grain facing the same direction. And then there's cross-laminated timber, where it's glued together, but you have each of the wood grains face different directions, each layer. So it allows you to build these big pieces of wood. You construct it at the factory and then you bring it and then put it in puzzle pieces together. Potentially making construction much more efficient. Kind of create a revolution in the construction industry as well. You can use it for walls, flooring, roofing. In North Carolina specifically, a bank, Live Oak Bank, decided to start a project to have their first mass timber construction project. That it all at 100% mass timber just means all of the structural components are, in fact, mass timber or wood. Large pieces of wood brought together, constructed to make the building. And then some of the superficial stuff is glass and metal. So most of this technology has been developed in Pacific Northwest in Europe using you see spruce pine fir products out there. There's been a lot of attention based on the amount of wood, and we'll talk about how much wood we actually have, but there have been interest in using southern yellow pine in the South recently. So 2 cross-laminated timber mills have been introduced in Alabama and Arkansas that kind of serves their region down in the deep South. We haven't seen anything up as far as this way, North Carolina. Not really sure if we will have something for a long time, but it's just something on the horizon as products get developed. It's just interesting to see what is coming down the pipeline. So for our forest resources in North Carolina, we have a bunch of land. We have a lot of total forest land. In 2021, it's estimated 18.7 million acres. There have been some ownership changes. Some of that is private acres going down since 2016, going to commercial, and some other uses, and then public acres have increased slightly. So that's donations to parks, acquisitions by public land. A lot of that is on the state side, so rather than the federal side. So you can kind of see how even with those changes, the market has the total forest land has been relatively steady through time. So by the numbers, you see about 54,000 acres are converted back to forest annually. That's, fields planted, mostly, fields planted, or just naturally converted back, so not being used anymore. And then a little bit more than that, 74,000 acres are converted to non-forest annually. So we've seen a lot of forests here being converted to solar panels, being converted to housing, commercial construction, and then even sometimes back to field. So there's a give or take where some people convert forest back to field, field back to forest, and then about 400,000 acres of forest land are cut. So that can be thinning, it can be final harvest. So a lot of those harvests are then planted back or allowed to naturally regenerate back. So that's based on FIA numbers, which they measure the whole subsample of the US every year. So how much of what timber types do we have? We actually still have over 50% hardwoods. You think of the South as mostly pine. We have had a lot of planted pine it's mostly been on land that's been natural pine in the past. You can see how right as the planted pine, the orange and the natural pine has gone down, the planted pine has gone up, and they've kind of equalized at this point. Hardwood has kind of been in a decline for the lowland hardwoods. I don't have an exact reason for that, other than, conversion to other uses. So lowland hardwood has gone down, upland hardwood has had ups and downs, but overall has our total stocking has stayed steady. Our growth, I don't have the number posted here, but our growth, the cut ratio, we're still growing a lot more timber than we're cutting. So Total harvest for a number of reasons has dropped slightly in 2021. You see these numbers are a couple years out of date. They're just the latest numbers we have. So the value of timber harvest, the stumpage value, was down about $12 million from 2020. It's just costs have increased and ability to get stuff cut. So our newest economic numbers for our whole state, and this includes forestry, logging, all of it, sawmills, furniture, the front and the back end. We've had a lot of jobs created, created 8.9 billion with B in payrolls. So a lot of people don't, when they talk about economic health of a state, they sometimes forget how important forestry actually is to North Carolina. And it creates 3.5 billion in industry output. So each of those jobs that are done through forestry create a lot more economic impact. And these are the areas that desperately need it, more rural areas where they may be more reliant on the forest industry in general to create jobs that then supply other industries. So we've rebounded since the pre-pandemic levels. We've had actually 2.5 billion gain, which was more than the aggregate decline in total economic output in 2020. So total economic output, the decline forestry made up for it in 1 year, and that $2.5 billion gain. So you can see some sectors from 2019, and this is kind of showing what we'll talk about with some of the changes in the timber market in the last year with announcements. So logging has improved. We had a lot of healthy bright spots. So in the primary solid wood mills, so sawmills, secondary wood mills, and then secondary paper and paper mills, where we've seen the biggest decline really has just been primary paper and paperboard mills. You saw a 7% decline in those mills, leading to a decline today. So you can see at the bottom we have the top forest sector in 2020 was the top among manufacturing sectors in our state. Slightly behind the food manufacturing in 2020, but we actually have outpaced them in 2021. So housing markets. So why are we talking about housing? Well, houses are built with wood. So there's about 1.46 million units, and it's kind of stabilized. It's actually up from 7.6% from last year in December. So you can see there is a dip in the first few months of the pandemic. Then it's kind of rebounded right away. Completions, you've heard pandemic, everyone says, oh, we can't do it because of logistic issues. Well, now permits and completions are actually have converged, and they're doing most projects that are starting are also completing, which is really good. So our housing market, it's still the main driver of the wood product industry. So we'll separate that out a little bit from the timber industry, but for the wood products, how valuable they can sell their wood has to do with how healthy the housing market is. It's still behind pre-2006 levels, but what's kind of saved us to some extent is multi-story homes. So we've had an increase in multi-story homes, even though we've had a decrease in single-story homes. So mortgage rates are still pretty high. That's depressed our housing market to some extent in construction activities, and then have led to our lumber markets. The story is not super clean as that. You still see, at least in my area, a ton of houses being built. I'm sure if you live in North Carolina, you have seen it throughout the country. I'm sure you've seen it. A lot of that is people who have a house really don't want to sell that house. So because they have a really good mortgage rate. So that higher mortgage rate has really incentivized new houses to be built because not many people are selling. So there is some competing activity. The high mortgage rate prevents houses from being sold, but at least in really needed markets. I live in Durham, so they don't have any problem selling all the units that are built. But the mortgage rate has stabilized to some extent. And who knows, in a couple of years, we may see it come down. So lumber prices, and this is specifically lumber futures, has stabilized recently as far as they can stabilize. So pre-2020 levels were higher than that now. You saw a spike. So the lumber futures market is really reflectant of the economy as a general. So when people have extra money, they end up spending it in housing. We saw a spike in right after the pandemic with additional money from the federal government. Everyone wanted to improve their house. And now we've seen it come down, but now it's come back up slightly and has increased from that 2020 level. We've had roller coaster lumber markets though. You can see that's 2021, the dark blue purplish, where it spiked to 1,600 per 1,000 board feet. And now it's about 487, so almost a quarter of that. But that wasn't a long lasting spike. That was just shows how reflectant the price is on small changes in the market. You can see all of 2023 has mostly stabilized, and then we've been pretty flat around that 487 mark. I'm not so concerned with the number specifically, more just how stable the market has been. So now what we talked about, how the housing market influenced the lumber market. Well, lumber and timber are kind of divorced right now. And we'll talk about that. Reason is we have generally an oversupply currently of wood. We call it a wall of wood. So it's like baby boomers or a large generation all do things at the same time. Well, and the same thing, everyone planted trees at one time. And we'll see some of those reasons. So you can see how fluctuating the price of lumber has been, while the overall price of saw timber, chip and saw has actually gone down and is actually starting to slightly increase. So who's to blame? Why did this happen? So there's forest growth gains, which is good. We've had a lot of improvement in the growth of wood. We can grow more wood in less time. We've had a lot of research into genetics. We're growing the best trees we've ever planted. And then there was a federal program still around, called CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, in the early 90s. They essentially paid a lease to landowners to plant degraded farm fields. So anyone around at that time that was a farmer knows what CRP is, and many of them are still reaping some of that benefit off of it. So they're 15-year leases. There's a state program that actually gives you a 30-year lease. So other factors, recession happened in 2008. So what happened is a lot fewer houses were being built. Everyone said that impacted the price of timber. Everyone said, oh, I'll wait and not cut today. Well, what happens when everyone waits? Those trees get more mature. They move from chip and saw pulpwood size to saw timber class. So now you have a ton of trees all planted around the 1990s. So they were probably 20 years old, which is starting to push into that more mature saw timber. And then they all did not get cut. Not all, but a lot of didn't get cut. They said, let's wait for future prices to improve. Well, it took a long time to improve. And we're still waiting for some of that to be cut. Saw timber efficiency, we have fewer larger capacity mills, and there's actually less competition for your saw timber. So pretty common economic trends. The sawmill efficiency has dramatically increased. That's technology, they can cut the wood better. They 23% less yield per 1,000 board foot, which is a huge amount. So here's where graph showing the CRP around 1998, and it still continues to this day, though not nearly as dramatic. So in the Southeast specifically, you can see that spike. We had a bunch of unproductive farmland that got planted. And it got planted with genetically improved seedlings. And it's 30+ years old now. So if you know about pine management, usually thin around age 20 or anywhere from 15 to 20. And then you do your final harvest. Maybe you do a second thinning, and then you do a final harvest around 30 years old. So all of those trees, if they haven't been cut already, are about 30 years old. So the question is, when will that supply end? Eventually. So if they're about 30 years old, maybe it takes another 5 years, maybe another 10 years before all that actually gets cut. We'll still have more trees getting to that age. Eventually, though, when supply meets demand, the demand goes up or stays the same, and then our prices improve. So how do you access these forest markets? Well, it depends on your location. It's huge. So what's the deal with location? Well, certain mills, we have fewer high capacity mills, just depends on what you can sell. So can it change your timing of your timber harvest? Absolutely. So depending on where you're at, incentives may be to manage for long-term high value trees, or do you manage for younger pulpwood and chip and saw trees? So it's still, there's a lot of companies that'll say, hey, you are in a good pulpwood market, let's go ahead and clear cut early and get a new stand planted. I still try to encourage people, if you can thin and still manage for those high value trees, almost no matter where you're at, can be sold. The problem is with more getting rid of pulpwood and smaller size trees. But it can. Do you let your trees grow to 30 years old, or do you look at doing a final harvest early? So how much do you have to invest in your stand? So part of that depends on how productive your site is. What I try to encourage is to limit your high intensity management to highly productive stands. So you want to match your management to what you can expect that stand to produce you. So, and you try to reduce costs early as much as possible. So if your money's tied up for 30 years, if you can get those trees growing with few inputs, only necessary inputs, then do that. We've seen prices skyrocket in labor, in fuel, and tractors, insurance, on and on. So what else? What products can I expect to harvest off my property in the future? Well, you don't really know, because all you can know is what can you harvest off today, and then what are my goals for the property. So am I okay? Do I want to grow it to maturity anyway because of some of the other things that we'll talk about later, carbon markets, or I really like to have it for recreation. I like the way mature trees look. I want to do low impact harvesting, or am I looking for purely investment standpoint? Those can have very different harvest implications. I'm not going to tell you how you should harvest it. It's very much deciding what is important for you, and then trying to achieve that. So what can I expect on my forest? Medium sites, we did an analysis recently, just looking at current prices and then how much it costs to set up those stands. It's not perfectly fair because it's today's dollars for everything. Prices will probably improve in the future, but medium sites with minimal inputs actually for the first time did a little bit better than high quality sites with high inputs. That just has to do with skyrocketing prices with inflation. So and then the flat price of timber. Either way, regardless of what you have, it still is making money. And that's been very stable and very consistent. We've seen returns be 9-10% is pretty normal. But even 6 or 7% is still great. Especially when you add up all the other things your land gets you. The land, that's not including your land increasing in price, the enjoyment you get it, and then other things you can do with your land, non-timber forest products, etc. So how can I plan for that uncertain future? We want to seek as much cost reduction as we can. I want to make your harvest match just because the federal program is around. Right now, through the Inflation Reduction Act, there's been pouring of money into specifically forest programs through the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. So if you're not already in touch, you have land and you're not already in touch with your agent, I definitely highly recommend that. There are plenty of there's some, at least in North Carolina, state programs available that can reduce costs up to 40%, 60% on certain practices. So be in touch with your state forestry agency and then your federal NRCS agent office. Traditional forestry is still proven to be a safe bet. You can see how even though we've had a lot of fluctuation in the lumber market, the being able to sell timber products has you'll still be able to do that. And then higher value products sell. You don't want to do something today that prevents you from harvesting in the future. So what we're worried about with some of these markets changing, we'll talk about what's changed, mills closing down, is you don't want to only harvest your high value stuff and sacrifice your future potential to sell. And then lastly, you want to tap into some of those alternative streams through time to pay your taxes. Firewood could be one, specialized logs, walnut, managing a few of those can be possible. Pine straw, especially if you have longleaf. And then NTFP is non-timber forest products. So there's a whole host of that. We won't get into it. I mean, it could be collecting acorns and selling those. It could be walnuts. It could be mushroom logs. It could be growing ferns. It could be forest farming in general. So growing medicinal plants. There's a ton of these markets, very specific to different areas. You have to know your area. You can talk to your local extension agent and try to figure out which one of those makes sense for you. And then carbon. So we'll touch on carbon at the end. So focus on long-term, not quarterly prices. You can see how this is just one quarter to the next. Oak saw timber spiked, a bunch of those are down. You say, oh shoot, I should really get out of the timber market because this quarter it's been terrible. Well, don't do that because one quarter, just for a whole host of reasons, can change. It can dramatically change back the next quarter. So we do post these timber prices on our website. You can look at them. You can look through. This is a piece of it. It has the whole host. So this is just showing pulpwood prices and pine saw timber price. We do post hardwood saw timber as well. So and hardwood pulpwood. So you can see how it's fairly stable for pine chip and saw, at least in the last year. Typically first quarter and the end of fourth quarter, winter is wetter. So usually prices do a little bit better in the winter. So, if you have dry land, sometimes it's best to harvest it then. But you're dependent upon when the practical implications of actually getting something harvested. You can see the percent change dramatically. This is the through line where it's from 1980 to 2023. You can see how over time, even though we've had these small changes, the price has been fairly stable and has starting to go up slightly. So we don't know if that slight change in pine saw timber is the end of that wall of wood. I think we're pretty close. Pine pulpwood, at least up until 23, has increased over time, though right at the end in 21 to 23 has declined. So hardwoods are always a safe bet, at least the high-end hardwoods. Hardwood saw timber has just increased steadily over time. There's a lot of reasons for that. Hardwoods, and this is mixed hardwoods, so it's not talking about any one hardwood in particular. You know, some years white oak is down and red oak is up, or, you know, everyone wants to put in hard maple flooring or, you know, red oak flooring. And, you know, when a lot of our hardwoods were being shipped to China, red oak flooring was a big market. They love red oak flooring. So hardwood pulpwood is just a lower end product. It's something that you hope to get rid of if you can. And our ability to move hardwood pulpwood really helps pine, surprisingly, because it's easier to get rid of. You don't have to pay to have it removed, and that means you can plant your stands cheaper. So getting to changes for this past year, if you've been following the news for forestry, paper mills have had a hard year. So these are some news headlines. The Kenton Mill closed down. That's a big mill in the western part of our state. Has had a huge impact and will continue to have a big impact for that area. They were open for 115 years. International Paper decided to cut production in a mill in Regalwood, which is in the south part of our state. I'll show a map here in a minute. Wood pellet producer in Viva filed for bankruptcy. It doesn't mean they're cutting production. They're planning to restructure and redo their deals. But it's just, you know, something in the news. And then the comment that mill closure will have impact on local economy for decades. So these are areas with not a ton of economic industry, where timber really was the economic driver for the area. And pulpwood, at least historically, has used a ton of wood. This is our industry has increased in general, but other reductions in wood, 60% of that has been due to the closing of those pulp and paper mills. This just shows exports and shows how many exports were due to paper manufacturing. So you can see that's higher than all the others. Wood furnishing, forestry, and supporting activities, paper manufacturing is the highest. So here's a cool map put up by Forest Consulting. They're a company that understands the timber markets. So Canton is the big mill in the western part of our state, but it's not just them. That our whole south, those big red marks are almost all pulp and paper mills. So you can see the green with the dot in the middle. There's one in North Charleston, another big one in South Carolina. Regalwood it actually has it labeled, I think, as a lumber mill, but what they closed down was the pulp and paper side of it. You can see some mills in East Tennessee also closed down. So when we say location, if you're closer to a mill that shut down, that may limit what you can do with the low-end products. On the flip side, what's been a really large bright spot is the opening of lumber mills. So we've had a ton of lumber mills open recently. We'll talk about two of those later. You can see all the lumber mills throughout the whole South that have opened. So some of the causes, you know, why is this happening? Beyond just the price going down for pulpwood, there's been a big boom in recycling efficiencies. So they're able to recycle more cardboard and more of those products than ever before. At least in Canton, aging facilities. So they would have had to invest a ton of money into all new equipment and environmental concerns. The mill was 115 years old, so they've had improvements since then, but it's still an old mill. And then reduced profitability, especially in certain areas. The Regalwood specifically said that, came out and said that reduced profitability was their biggest reason why they closed down. So two huge mills that are going to open, at least in North Carolina, they'll change our markets dramatically for long periods of time. The Benderholz mill, which is from Austria. So they purchased a mill. They purchased a mill in Florida. They purchased a mill here. They purchased the Klausner 2 mill. And it has a sawing capacity of 200 million board foot a year. So they'll produce a bunch of timber products. Glue lamb is potentially, we talked about where those big beams that they stack wood on top of to bend and make those pretty arches. That may be a product they produce. And they'll produce a bunch of their traditional products too. Another one right up the road, you can see this is east of Raleigh, is Roseburg Forest Products. So they're a company from Oregon. They're gonna open up a brand new mill in Weldon, about 20 minutes away. They'll produce almost double, so 400 million board feet of lumber. And they're expected to open hopefully at the end of this year. It depends on a bunch of stuff, hiring, and getting their machines up and running. So hopefully we see that open up and slowly open to full capacity. So it could just open up a lot of markets. And then why are they coming? Well, there's a lot of untapped potential for forest products in the Southeast. There's changes in the global market. Whether in Austria, they have mills in Germany. They may be harvesting, with Russian invasion of Ukraine. If that's changed their some of their decision with wanting safe investment in the U.S., they have a strong outlook on wood in the Southeast. You saw how much wood we actually have, and then new and emerging forest products. So they can come up with up-to-date mills that can take advantage of those emerging forest products. So Inviva, so they are, besides recently with their news, they have been growing ever since they've opened up their first mill. Wood pellets for energy is not something anyone, I think, saw on their radar 10 years ago, but it's becoming a big industry. There is sustainable aviation fuel that may be potentially they're able to use these wood pellets for. They are to supply 750,000 tons a year, which is an additional 10 to 15% demand for their wood pellets. So it could have a huge impact on our feedstock markets. All of these, it seems to point to that. I know they won't close, or we don't know if a different company will buy, but either way, it's still a market and it will continue to be a market in the future. So a note on carbon credits. So we've talked about a lot of these traditional markets. Well, I wanted to address at least a lot of people are interested in carbon. How can I get additional money for my timberland? Is it worth it? There are a bunch of requirements. So permanence, this says maintain for 100 years. That really is just relating to like California cap and trade. There is, a requirement, each of these companies that they'll pay you, but you have to maintain a certain amount of trees on your property for a long time. You have to have additionality, meaning that that's kind of a buzzword right now. It means you're doing more than business as usual. You can prove that through a number of different ways. You can say, hey, my trees are mature right now. I could harvest it based on these economic reasons, but because I'm getting this money, I'm choosing not to harvest for a period of time. And then you can't have leakage, meaning that, so GHG, greenhouse gases, they can't have an unintended increase in emissions in another location. So you can't just say, hey, I'm purchasing this so I can emit more somewhere else. you have to have an actual reduction in global house gas emissions. So is it high enough? It's a very good question. Part of it depends on you. So I would say that if you are seeking the highest and best return for your wood, it may not be worth the price they're willing to give you. For reference, $4 to $6 is about what you can get for, let's say, a hunt lease on a property in North Carolina. So just to keep all that in mind, but if you didn't want to harvest, then you could have a justifiable reason why. Maybe it's worth it to get paid to hold on to your timber. What you don't want to do is, let's say your timber really needs to be thin to keep it healthy, and you choose not to harvest. Well, that can limit your future potential for that wood. So you may need to then clear cut it because the trees have suppressed each other to the point where thinning it won't improve the health anymore. You don't want to limit your options because you choose to do a carbon credit. You want it to open up and work with your existing management plan. And how you know that is just by working with a professional that knows your trees, knows what can be done, and still fit within your overall goals and management. Compliance markets are not really available in North Carolina. We're more looking at those voluntary markets. The difference is, if you're curious, we have a publication that I think Bob will link to. The difference is that the compliance markets are the government saying, hey, you're only allowed to emit a certain amount. And so you have to pay if you emit more than that, which drives up the prices. Right now it's voluntary. So let's say I have my energy bill, I'm willing to pay a few extra dollars to sequester that carbon. Then your energy company, Duke Progress, whatever, would pool all that money together and then purchase some timber credits through a company. So two of those companies right now in North Carolina are Forest Carbon Works, and they have certain requirements. You can see they have 40 acres minimum, 125-year contract, but they do allow thinning after 6 years. So if you have a little over 40 acres, you know, some of these markets are now accessible to you, which may not have been before. Core Carbon is another big one, and these are funded by large companies. I mean, Boeing, Microsoft, Amazon. These are large money coming in the billions of dollars, estimated through these companies. Not just these, but other companies in general. Core Carbon, so they have 40 acres minimum. They do allow harvesting. We don't have a good number about how long their contracts are, but their methods have been approved, and there are a company you can go in. Each one of these you can Google and pull up more information for them. So the takeaways, at least for me, with the market, is forestry is a long-term entity. So don't necessarily let the market today dictate what you do in 20 years. You can have an idea where we're at, but it won't be the same market in 20 years. You may have more products available. Knowing why you have forest land is really important, knowing what your goals are, and you want to steward land in a way that makes the trees happy, healthy, and valuable for the next generation. So you don't want to limit your potential in the future. So you have questions, there's my email, phone number, and you can go on our website at the extension forestry at forestry.ces, ncsu.edu. Thank you. So I will, I think it can be question time if we have any. So that's what I
Yeah,
have.
so folks, thanks, Jameson, for your presentation. Folks, at this time, you can enter your questions into the Q&A feature of Zoom. Just click on the icon and enter them there. We did have one in the chat that came in from Eric Norland, and he's wondering, could the decline in demand for paper attributable to doing more electronic business now and what used to be done with paper is now done on the internet?
Yeah, I mean, I could see that being a change in that specific market in general. There's a lot more uses for paper or for pulp besides making paper. I mean, Amazon boxes have exploded as far as the market. I wouldn't say it's just attributed to that, though. Yeah, paper has in general declined a lot. Fluff is used in component products. Think diapers. Think just a ton of different uses. So, but that is, yeah, that's definitely one thing that you can attribute it to.
Question, is there a list of North Carolina paper mills?
So there is a list. I could find it. I could send that to you if you want.
No, actually, Jameson, I'm
Yeah.
going to put a link in. There's a website called Primary Forest Products Network that you can search mills throughout the South, including paper mills and lumber mills and everything else. And so I have just posted that in the chat.
Perfect.
Another question that's come in. Do you have any insights on the future of Riegelwood Mill?
I, I don't have any crystal ball. I know it's closed for now. They still have one machine up running, but they're limiting who they take wood from their main producers. So I wish I did. I just don't.
Okay, do we have any additional questions? This would be the time to, you can put them in the Q&A feature, that's preferred, but if you're not, the chat would also be okay. I want to mention for the North Carolina Tree Farm Program, they have a couple more upcoming webinars. The next one is April 18th, and it's on domestic and global hardwood market. It's an update by Tim Knoll with the Hardwood Review. And then on May 16th, we're going to talk about pond management, and that's with Sam Williams and Roger Pittman, who are with the Triangle Pond Management Program. And those are being brought to you by the North Carolina Tree Farm Program. So, and you'll find those webinars, they'll become available for pre-registration here soon on the Forestry webinar portal, which is at forestrywebinars.net. And then just again, today's program was sponsored by our North Carolina Tree Farm Program, and the contact information is here for you if you'd like to reach out to the program for more information about Tree Farm. They'll be happy to provide you that information. So with that, I think we've come to the end of the program. I do want to thank you, Jameson, for putting together the presentation and giving it to us today. It was a great presentation. It's always good to hear about the markets and everything. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank the North Carolina Tree Farm Program for sponsoring today's webinar. These are opportunities that they make available to all. So thank you, Leslie, with the North Carolina Tree Farm Program, for hosting and sponsoring today's webinar. And with that, folks, thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks for attending.